I like to characterize ourselves as technologists masquerading as finance guys, masquerading as pool guys. That's who we are.
You had a tweet that went viral, and I'm going to read it out loud for everyone.
So I unceremoniously killed the other two companies, went all in on lawns, and the rest is history.
Welcome back to Built in America. I'm your host, Sam Mahmood, and today we're exploring the world of home services. How our guest is building a behemoth in this sector. Having done it in lawn care service, now he's building a national pool cleaning business, and I'm excited to have Jeremy on the podcast today. Jeremy, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Jeremy, I know you as an individual as the person who's the intersector between software and home services. The audience doesn't know that, but why don't we know a little bit about your background and just share with the audience about what you've done in the past?
Yeah, so I'm a career entrepreneur. I've been building, scaling, and exiting companies for functionally my entire adult life, but really I've spent the last 15 years or so building at the intersection of home services and software. I started really early on in my kind of mid-teens. I built a digital agency that I grew to, a small firm that did kind of growth marketing and product work all around Southern California. And then was looking for the opportunity in 2009 to start something that had a little more scale to it than a strict consulting practice. I was doing very well and making more money than 19-year-old me ever thought I would be, but I was ultimately limited by the finite number of hours I had in a day. And so wanted something with more scale and, kind of looked around and realized that the entire home service category is this massive, fragmented, thoroughly offline, largely low-tech space with little to no real software kind of deployed in it to run it, run businesses more efficiently. And so I essentially started a marketplace for in-home services, a company called Goldenshine, and we can get into that, but ran that over 3 years, sold it to private equity in my early 20s, took a week off, started a company called Lawn Love, which is a marketplace for lawn and landscaping, ran that for 8 years, raised a bunch of venture, scaled it to a national brand in lawns, sold it, started Cabana, and here we are today. Happy to break that out though. That's the high level though.
Before we get into all the business endeavors, you have a unique last name, Yamaguchi. It comes from I believe, a Japanese background in Southeast Asia. You lived in Japan and Southeast Asia prior to coming to the US. Walk us through that journey a little bit of what you were doing in Southeast Asia and your childhood experiences as well.
Yeah, so I was born to missionary parents. So I was born and raised in mostly Japan, Southeast Asia, East Africa. Traveled a lot as a kid. I spent a bunch of time in Myanmar, a little bit in the Philippines, a little bit in Malaysia. Ultimately moved to Uganda at 15, where I solo traveled through much of Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Zambia, Rwanda, before ultimately immigrating to the U.S. at 16 to come live with my dad and kind of gaining American citizenship, and have never looked back. At this point, feel firmly American, but I was ultimately kind of raised a very third culture kid.
Jeremy, do you think you coming from a very multicultural background, living in Asia, and then now coming here and doing business in the U.S., how has that shaped you today?
I think it's difficult to decompose all of the inputs that kind of sum to who you are as a person. But it was a very unique kind of childhood, right? You have a diversity of exposures to culture, to kind of businesses, to ideas. I definitely would not re-roll the dice and trade my childhood for an ordinary American suburban one, right? I was homeschooled my entire life. I finished high school early at 16 and got a GED and started my first company. So not a unique, not a typical kind of educational background or kind of emergent environment for a kid to grow up in, but very much an instructive one. And I value it a lot. It was a lot of fun growing up with such a variety of scenery.
Did you have entrepreneurial parents?
In a way, yeah. So both my parents are kind of run nonprofits. So my mom runs an orphanage in northern Gulu, Uganda, orphanage and school. And my dad ran a nonprofit for many, many years and now has a winery down in Mexico. So very entrepreneurial endeavors in their own right. They are, masters of their destiny, charging and charting their own course. So I think, yeah, very entrepreneurial, but with a heavy bent toward charity, nonprofits, and helping people.
I love that. And then you came into this intersection of home services and trying to take over their entire market. Let's dive into that a little bit. The first company we talked about a little bit was Goldenshine. You sold to private equity at a young age. Walk us through that journey of how you sold that to private equity.
So I guess I could start with the question of why I sold it and maybe kind of wind all the way back there. So Golden Shine was a marketplace for in-home services, so maids, carpets, windows, etc. I went to go book a housekeeper and realized that the entire kind of home services landscape was again very fragmented and low tech. But even house cleaning in particular was like, if you wanted a great service provider, you basically had two choices. You could go to Craigslist or Yelp or the Yellow Pages and call a bunch of independent contractors, and quality was all over the map. Or you could call one of these big franchises like Molly Maids, Mary Maids, and even they weren't using much in the way of software to run their businesses. They're very expensive. So I, at that point, cultivated a lot of skills around product design and growth marketing, and decided to bring those to bear to build a marketplace in home services. But I bootstrapped this thing and grew it all across Southern California over the arc of about 3 years. And during that time, a number of very well-funded competitors popped up, mostly in and around the Bay Area and New York City. So a company called Homejoy got funded by YC. I don't know if you've heard of them, but got funded by YC, Andreessen Horowitz, and Google Ventures, raised $40 million, and were, charging down the path, selling home services at $20 an hour, largely negative unit economic territory, but an aggressive kind of growth strategy to eat the market. Another company called Handy launched out of HBS and raised a bunch of money in New York. And so it was clear that like the landscape was going to quickly saturate with a ton of hyper capitalized, fairly sophisticated players. And that kind of motivated me to find a happy home for the business that I built and figure out what was next. And ideally change the equation so I was the one on the other side of the kind of has a big war chest and lots of capital, lever, as opposed to on the broke and poor and soon to be clobbered side. So, I hired an investment banker. We shopped the deal. We found a bunch of interested parties. Ended up picking one, and sold it to kind of a small PE fund in my early 20s, and that was the end of that chapter.
I mean, selling a company in your early 20s to PE is no small task, right? And then you took some time there and probably had an inflection point saying, hey, I have a niche in this home service space. And then you chose Lawn Love. And you saw an intersection in the landscaping and lawn mowing space that you can go solve for. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I took about a week off after selling Golden Shine. Probably should have taken more time in hindsight because Lawn Love ended up being a 8-year sprint. But I was, fairly convinced that I wanted to start another company in home services. Really liked the category. I knew I wanted to keep compounding there. And I, fairly agnostically started 3 separate companies and was pretty mercenary about it, to be honest with you. Like I didn't have any religion around lawns or any particular, love for grass. I cared about solving business problems and building like better, more innovative solutions that elevated the customer experience and helped our pros earn a living. And you could do that across a ton of different attack vectors, right? Different kind of service verticals. So I started a on-demand personal training company, a lawn mowing company, Lawn Love, and a on-demand pool cleaning company, as it happens. And we will come around full circle to that story. But I built 3 websites, 3 conversion funnels, spun up 3 ad campaigns, threw a bunch of ad traffic directly at these 3 different brands. Lawn care took off the quickest and showed the most early promise. It was just able to generate more leads at lower CAC faster over about a 2-week experiment. So I unceremoniously killed the other 2 companies, went all in on lawns, and the rest is history.
So I love that you did a little test iteration campaign on 3 different companies, and then the market told you, hey, this is the market leader over here. So where's Lawn Love today? What happened with the business? I've used a little bit of the service the other week. I just love the funnel automation that you have via text messages and so forth. It just gets me going, and I have to actually book a service, which I actually did. Tell us where the business is today.
So we launched it in 2014. Got into YC with the company, raised about $6 million in a large extended seed round, and then spent 8 years or so growing it to a national player in lawn and landscape. So we scaled it to about 120 cities in 40 states, had about 250 full-time corporate folks and thousands of independent contractors in the field mowing lawns every day. And then in 2021, merged with a competitor, a company called Lawn Starter, to create the largest marketplace in lawn and garden in the country. So it is still going strong. really good business, spitting cash. Very, very clearly has claimed the crown in its category. So it's an impressive company, still running strong. I spent about a year over there and helped run the integration, and then left a year and a day later because LawnStarter had a perfectly good CEO and didn't need a second one. So I think the time was right to figure out what was next.
There's something unique here. You talked about you raised from YC. Initially, you were denied by YC, is what I heard, and then the year after you got to YC, you raised $6 million. So, how did that transition really happen of getting denied and then going and raising capital from a prestigious group like YC?
Yeah, so I can tell that story. I started Lawn Love at this point. I'd gone all in on the lawn category, but it was still very, very nascent. We were generating a handful of leads. I had maybe one guy mowing lawns in the field in San Diego, first kind of pilot market, and applied to YC mostly because I wanted to again be on the other side of the capital equation and the player with deep pockets and lots of dry powder to go spend to go to war, and wanted to raise venture dollars essentially to go win the market. So I applied as a solo founder, understanding that like odds weren't great. They have a pretty well documented bias for co-founded teams, but ultimately got an interview. Went in. I pitched Paul Graham, Jessica Livingston, Kaiser Eunice, John Ralston, and a handful of other partners. It's like 7 partners. 10-minute interview, very adversarial. Uh, you know, beat me up, I think, quite nicely on the business and what we were building, but ultimately seemed to get it at the end. But I got an email from them saying, "Look, this is interesting. What you built is impressive, but more or less come back with traction." I think we had all of $200 in monthly revenue at that point. So I spent the next 6 months just like hyper growing the company, and I grew it over the intervening 6 months from like $200 a month in revenue to about 13K a month in revenue. Um, and then I applied again on the final day of the next kind of YC applications closing. And I got an email from Paul Buchheit, who was a partner there, who said, "What have you done? What have you accomplished between when we last chatted and now?" And I told him the metrics and kind of explained how things had gone. Got another interview invite to fly up to the Bay and kind of pitch the partnership. This time around, I think I pitched Sam Altman, Kazo Yunus, Kevin Hale, and I think Kat Minyalnik, and it was a very different interview tenor. Like they were mostly answering each other's questions. It felt a little bit like the decision had already been made at that point, and ultimately got accepted, and that definitely changed the arc of Lawn Love's trajectory.
What did YC do to Lawn Love?
YC has a bunch of advantages that they give companies. The first stated advantage is really just a credential. So because it's well regarded and kind of understood to be a premier, the premier accelerator, getting in makes fundraising significantly easier. You raise more money at much higher valuations from better investors. So that largely pays for itself and makes YC largely an intelligence test. If you do get in, you should probably go. But beyond that, it's also just like an incredible network, right? Super smart, hyper achieving founders, very interested and open to helping you. It was very useful in that regard as well. And I've made deep, lifelong friendships with a lot of YC founders that I kind of originally met through that batch. We've been in each other's weddings. We've met each other's kids and families. We're very, very close friends, and they're very impressive kind of outlier founders in their own right. And it's tough to get that sort of a density of talent and camaraderie from any ordinary network. And it's pretty special in that regard.
Jeremy, if I look at your history of what you've done, and I know you a little bit more on a personal note than most people, is you've created this funnel of your history and continue to compound that. What I mean is you started a digital marketing agency, learning the growth marketing, how to go build the marketing engine behind the business. You used that, you built it in Goldenshine. You took that, did it again in Lawn Love. And now today we have a company called Cabana, and you're going to change the industry in the pool cleaning space. You had a tweet that went viral, and I'm going to read it out loud for everyone. I started a new venture and we're calling it Splash, which is now Cabana. We plan to acquire hundreds of small pool cleaning companies and build a first national brand in pool service. We raised 4.5 million in pre-seed round led by Asymmetric along with 40 plus exceptional founders and CEOs. Why pools, you ask? Simple. The market is large, customers are recurring and sticky, and the competitive landscape is fragmented and low tech. Most critically, there's no dominant national brand in pool cleaning in low of nature that says that can't be. So we're building one. And Jeremy, you've raised from people like Andrew Wilkinson, Cody Sanchez, and many others. This tweet went viral. Tell me a little about what happened post tweet.
So yeah, I mean, we had a ton of inbound from folks who wanted to sell us their pool companies, wanted to work with Cabana and join the team, or wanted to invest in the company. And we raised another $2.2 million in just opportunistic kind of cash from very high signal folks after that went live. But I think it's like important to plant a flag, right? There's a lot of people doing things in and around pools, and there's not a lot of people doing it how we're doing it. And I think it's important to state your case and make your claims on why you're doing it the way you are, and you know, establish yourself as the player who is likely to go win in this space. I think that's important.
You found a sector that's quite unique. I read a little bit about this sector. It's a $10 billion sector. $7 billion of that is recurring, and it's non-cyclical, and it's yet to be gobbled by private equity. So when thinking about this, you've kind of merged Lawn Love already, and then you probably sat back and said, pool cleaning has a lot of upside today. So where was that inflection point where pool cleaning came to fruition? And then where have you seen it transition and progress furthermore as we speak today?
Yeah, I mean, to tell the story, I kind of have to tell the entire story around post-exit, founder journey. Um, and so, I sold Lawn Love in June 2021 after 8 years of, sprinting and a ton of hyper growth. We grew Lawn Love an average of 18% a month over month for 60 straight months. It was enormously kind of operationally intensive, right? We were growing a human services business that doesn't scale like SaaS with zero marginal cost to replicate an incremental unit. You have to hire another dude and stick him in your backyard to generate an incremental dollar, right? So operationally very painful, hyper seasonal business. It you can't mow snow, right? So it crashes into winter and then explodes through summer, spring. I think pretty consistently for 5 straight years, we would grow more in the month of March than we did the entire previous year, 5 years straight. So it was just like a brutal operational lift. We'd hire 80 people a month in February just to get ahead of the March growth curve. And so that was difficult, but landed the plane, found an incredible exit in partnership with the Lawn Starter team, and then was kind of yeeted into the abyss of post-founder syndrome, where it's I think a lot of founders who've had at least some success, have a similar challenge, which is, one, I think it's human nature. You want your subsequent chapters to be grander and more momentous than the last, right? You always want the next thing to be bigger and more impressive than the last thing. And after a certain amount of success, that leaves a finite number of fairly overfished ponds to go plumb. And at the same time, you also know how tall the mountain is, right? So you don't have the benefit of naivety where you're just putting one foot in front of the other, and before you know it, you're at base camp. Before you know it, you're halfway up the mountain. Finally you're at the top. You know how high the mountain is. You know how tough the climb is on day one. So you really do tend to view every opportunity through the lens of, is this worth the effort, right? One, can this be huge? Two, is this worth the effort? And that's a difficult framing to view opportunities through, because one, you kind of should just suspend your understanding of how hard it's going to be, because it's like eating elephants. You eat it a bite at a time. It's ultimately, you're just chewing mouthfuls of food either way. You're just eating something very large over an arc of a longer period. But it's also paradoxically, most of the most important ideas aren't obvious, right? They look kind of like toys, to paraphrase Paul Graham. They look like renting out airbeds in your living room and feeding people breakfast, or they look like, building a black taxi livery service for your rich friends in San Francisco, right? It doesn't necessarily look like this transcendent scaled, world altering thing on day one. And so you kind of have to be willing to play around a little bit and not necessarily view everything through this lens of, is it going to be enormous? Is it going to be transcendent? Is it going to be foundationally important for the world? So that's what I did. I spent 18 months on sabbatical post exit. I played around with a ton of ideas. I built, me and a friend built a Gen AI kind of LLM powered startup that used ML models to read, summarize, and annotate the news. A company called Clarity. High level thesis being, if I asked you if you're reading your news through a filter bubble, you'll probably say yes. If I asked you if you'd like to be more broadly read across tribal aisles, you'll also probably say yes. But as a practical matter, no one wants to go read everything the other tribe publishes every day. So LLMs are great at that. They could literally read everything that the New York Times or CNN or Fox have published on like Russia, Ukraine. They can tell you where coverage gaps exist between media outlets. They can tell you which media outlet is sensationalizing or significantly focusing on a given story, which ones are ignoring stories. Really interesting product, good for the world, good for democracy, should exist. But ultimately realized as I was kind of playing and experimenting that this product, you're basically competing with Facebook, Instagram, and the New York Times for finite attention spans. And I do not want to be in the attention span game. That is a brutal game and one that is a race to the bottom where you're basically building roadblocks to like cannibalize people's dopamine. That didn't seem fun. And so moved away from that. I built a marketplace for ADU building just as an experiment, high level thesis. Housing shortages in California continue to be ever and more pressing. We have laws on the books that allow you to alleviate them through repurposing existing space, garages, etc., into dwelling units and livable space. But it's difficult to find good builders, right? It's difficult to find great contractors. The permitting process is archaic. The whole like practical getting it from idea to livable, finished, permitted unit, that whole journey is painful and challenging. So, I thought, hey, you can build a marketplace for this. You can pair great general contractors who are ADU specialists with people who have space and capital to go build. Interesting idea. Think it should be done. But ultimately, as I was building around these experiments and trying to stay agnostic and trying to mostly just be playful and not view everything through the is this a $1 billion idea lens, I realized over that experiment two real things. One, I realized that I do not love the 0 to 1 phase. Some people thrive in this phase, right? Like some people are absolutely passionate about like navigating the idea maze and creating novel businesses and like business models that don't exist, educating their markets. They're 0 to 1 people, they're 0 to 1 specialists, and then they love to like hand it off to the growth folks once they've got it from nothing to something. I am the opposite. I'm a 1 to N guy. Like I love taking pre-existing, boring, offline, largely quote overlooked spaces and out executing in them. I like building better solutions and using software as a lever to improve the status quo in a space that has historically been like somewhat underserved. And like that's the game I like to play. I don't love like flogging hedges and seeing what sort of product market fit comes out. And I think I mostly don't like it because you can't run very fast when you're not sure if the direction you're running in is the right one, right? If you run super fast in the wrong direction, now you're retreading, retracing, even more distance. Whereas if it's a pure, 1 to N game rather than an idea maze game, and it's all execution, like I'll put that on my back all day long if it's an execution game. That I can play with happily. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm an execution guy and a 1 to N guy, not a 0 to 1 guy. And more importantly, I'm a home services guy. Like I didn't set out to be a home services guy, but I have spent 15 years cultivating a very discrete set of skills that afford me a lot of advantages when it comes to building scalable home service companies, from running blue collar industries and large field crews to building software and tooling to help coordinate all of that to all the local level consumer focused growth marketing stuff. We can get into that, but I realized I'm like, look, I'm a B grade AI founder, right? Like I'm thoroughly undifferentiated. I'm forgettable. I would be yet another Me Too participant surfing a very large wave. Or I can go be like a relative megalodon in a category that I know well and have spent a whole lot of time building a lot of discrete advantages in. I should go do that. So I decided I'm going to go start another home services company. The question then was which. I looked at every home service vertical. I looked at HVAC, plumbing, garage door, foundation repair, duct cleaning, you name it. Ultimately landed on pools for reasons you mentioned. Pools and lawns are very synonymous. There's obviously really important kind of nuance and differences between the categories, but they're both small ticket, largely out of home, predominantly residential, largely density driven, live and die based on kind of route optimization. And that's all stuff I know super well and have done for a very long time. So pools came to the fore and I went all in.
And if I were to challenge you on the pool space today, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, is pool cleaning companies are generally ran by 1 or 2 individuals. They're charging 45 to 60 bucks a job. The scalability in that space is quite small sometimes. How do you go and consolidate that fragmented market and be able to bring scale to that area?
So this is exactly why I think it hasn't been eaten by private equity, right? I mean, now there's definitely plenty of emergent players who are starting to run at the space, but it has largely lagged, categories like HVAC or plumbing or electrical or garage door or roofing or lawns. And it's because, PE funds are generally playing an AUM game and raise these enormous funds and have to write very large checks as a result, which means that they have to go buy companies with large EBITDA where they can deploy enough dollars for it to matter. And there just frankly aren't that many large companies in pool to go buy. There are functionally none, right? Something that rounds to like dozens of companies with EBITDA north of 10 million a year. So it's just not a good attractive space for traditional private equity because it takes the gluing together of all of these subscale, disparate, very kind of small assets into a bigger platform. How do you do that? You do that if you're good at operating home services companies to start and you have a tried and true background in building software solutions and systems and process to operate small, fragmented, low tech service providers across a wide swath of geographies. That is exactly what we did in lawns. And I think that playbook also works in pools. So that's why we're excited about it and why we're going to do it. But it takes more than just the classic PE playbook of multiples arbitrage, where you go buy things for 3 times and sell them for 10. Like, not just an M&A game, it's aggressively an operational game, and it's a product and engineering and technology game. And that is, I think, not a game that your average PE fund plays. Or they play fractions of that game, but they're not like native technologists. I like to characterize ourselves as technologists masquerading as finance guys, masquerading as pool guys. That's who we are.
Jeremy, tell us a little bit about, you're doing these acquisitions in the pool cleaning space today. At the same token, you're building unique software. How are you going about building this? Not many people know this about you, but you're almost like a one-man show, and you like to be a one-man show instead of building things on your own until you start being able to start um, building a team around you. But you have a lot of the tools and skill sets that many people don't have to go do this. So where do you start from actually this venture right now? You raised $4.5 million. You probably raised a little bit more thus far, and now you've kind of put people around you. But walk us through like point A to now where you are today.
Yes, I've raised 6.7 at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this stems from the career arc. I've been very autodidactic my entire life, probably as a hallmark of having been homeschooled and largely self-taught for much of the childhood. But like, taught myself how to design and was doing kind of growth marketing, like kind of graphic and digital work, and then realized that designing pretty things on the internet was only like so interesting, and you needed to learn how to code to add function to the form. And so taught myself how to code and then built an agency and developed, and then like eventually got into growth marketing practice, kind of focused on lead gen, SEO, SEM. And like, yes, I have solo founded everything that I've started so far, but I don't have any religion around it. Right. Like I think generally the equation is actually favors co-founded teams in the early days, because if you can have 2 or 3 really smart people working 80-hour weeks to get something, to materialize versus one, you have a natural advantage. But I think that advantage competes away very quickly. If you're capable of doing the initial startup work and you can do a lot of the jobs around kind of growth marketing and lead gen and SEO and hiring and training and operating companies, if you can do those jobs, then you can earn the right to raise the capital to hire amazing people and surround yourself with them, because no one builds in a vacuum, right? Like, solo founder or not, if you want to be even remotely successful, you very quickly have to like unsolo yourself and surround yourself with talented people who build the company with you alongside you. And we've done that very much at Cabana and have amazing folks that we've brought on board and are looking to bring many more in the years to come. But like, how do I do it? Let me answer your original question. So how did I do it? I mean, I cold called a ton of companies, like HVAC companies, duct cleaning companies, bounce house rental companies, foundation repair companies, pool companies. I introduced myself to the founders of these businesses. I asked to get coffee and or lunch with them, and I sat down with them and learned about their companies and pitched them on selling them to me. And then eventually learned enough about their industries that I developed a very strong, I think reasonably clearly articulated thesis around pools in particular, and started cold calling only pool company owners. Eventually found a talented guy who had built his business up over 4 years, a guy named Kyle, and built a wonderful company here in San Diego. Got to know him a lot better, ultimately, got very kind of excited about the business that he built, and pitched him an offer, which he accepted, and we acquired his company in April of this year. We've since done about 6 bolt-on acquisitions in the intervening months, and are very much off to the races. But it was a lot of like picking up the phone and talking to people, and I think this is what is often lost in much of this exercise. And not to necessarily typecast, but I think there's a well trodden, you know, GSB to like entrepreneurship to acquisition to faceplant pipeline, where you can be very sophisticated on the finance side and you can be very sophisticated on like the business levers side. But if you're unwilling to do the very gritty, dialing for dollars type work, um, and show up and just like, I don't know, push a pool pole and like get in the weeds and get your hands dirty, I don't think you'll earn the respect of a lot of blue collar folks who will view you as this like abstract kind of, you know, better than them or thinks you're better than them type. And you also won't learn enough about the actual fundamentals of the business to really go improve it in important ways. So I think that's an important thing to do.
Jeremy, you're like a jack of all trades, which sometimes that can come off in a good way or also in a bad way. Because if I think about this, you can build websites, you can do your own marketing, you're a graphic designer, you're cold calling, you know how to do acquisitions, you can do financial modeling, you're doing it all, right? Not many people if they were to hear this today, they'd be overwhelmed just hearing you. Like Jeremy's someone of one of none at this point, right? So if you were advising someone today who were starting a venture similar to yours, whether it's home service or something else, and they didn't have all those skill sets, what are the first couple of steps that they would do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's understated and underrated how easy it is to like outsource a lot of this stuff, right? And I do all of this, and I can do all of it, but I also, that earns me the right to go find people who are better at it than me, and I have very happily brought in very talented people who are radically better than me at most of these different disciplines, and they've elevated beyond my kind of base level skills. Me being able to do it myself is really only helpful for the 0 to 1 and for maybe qualifying what great looks like when I go hire people. But inevitably, the job of a founder, if you're successful, is that you're always operating at the edge of your competence, right? Like definitionally, if you're good at your job, you can have built a business that is bigger than one you've ever run before, presented with challenges you've never faced before, right? And it's just this constant, persistent exercise in solving progressively harder puzzles, the prize for which is a harder puzzle still, and like kicking down bigger and sturdier doors one after the other. So like, don't, it's Everest. Like, don't view the exercise as one of like taking all those steps at once. The exercise is one of taking a single step followed by another, followed by another, and before you know it, you'll have traveled a great distance. So step one, bring in talented folks, heavily leverage Upwork and gig markets and your friends who are good at what they do, and have them help you. Step two, don't get intimidated by the sum totality of the work. Just pay attention to what's immediate and most kind of urgent and what you can do today, and the rest will come, right? And like lastly, I think, yeah, I think it's also just this thing where, if you're not willing to bring other smart people on board, and if you're too self-contained, you're not going to go very far, right? Like I try to get away from this idea that I can do it all, because I definitively cannot, right? Like I can do some of these jobs well, and a large number of them poorly, and many of them not at all. So, while I might be a little more multidisciplinary than the average bear, I do think that like I absolutely I rely on an incredible number of very talented people every day to do what we do.
That's huge advice. And Cabana is moving in a very fast direction. Obviously, 6 acquisitions have been done. You've raised a fair amount of money. You're moving at a pace that many people would dream to move at. Through anything, there's always hurdle, right? I'm sure at Lawn Love you had some hurdles. Cabana, there's probably some hurdles. Walk us through some of the big 800-pound gorillas that you're facing today.
Yeah, so I like to characterize what we're building as essentially 3 startups instead of 1. And it really is like you're running 3 companies at once. So you're running a small pool cleaning business, right? You have all the attendant challenges kind of natural there too. Um, Personnel and HR issues, service quality issues, you know, spinning up bank accounts and flow of funds and collections issues. Like all the problems that every small business has are your problems. You're running this company, right? And hopefully working with smart field operators and GMs to run it, but those are ultimately your problems, right? So you're running a small business, or dozens of small businesses eventually. Two, you're running a private equity firm. With the whole like roll up model, you have to do all of the sourcing, the qualifying, the diligencing, build the entire machinery for finding great companies, understanding that they're good, getting, convincing them to partner with you, and then consummating those deals. You have to worry about capital stack and how you actually fund these deals and not over levering or putting yourself behind a gun, right? It's like a straight up wholly separate profession that you have to do very well. And if you do one of these jobs well and not the other, you fail, right? And then third, with our model, we're also like a venture style like SaaS company in that we are working to build vertical software into the space. And some companies only do that, right? All you do is build vertical SaaS. You don't run a small local home services business. You don't run a private equity firm. You just spend all day building vertical SaaS. And we got to do all three of those things, and we got to do all three of them well. And with it, should we succeed, come enormous rewards and a durable, incredible operating advantage that's going to be tough for other people to touch. But it is an enormous effort, right? It's a big operational lift. It's a big kind of execution lift for sure. So that is definitely one of the biggest hurdles that we're running at. It's just the nature of the business as we've designed it, like is a challenging one.
Yeah, you've broken it down very well in three sectors, right? And usually, you and I share the same trouble sometimes with doing this holdco and these acquisitions. It's not easy, right? People are very keen on this business acquisition space, but there's a lot that goes with it. Just like you said, putting bank accounts together, putting the teams together, and so forth. And it's very underestimated how much work goes into it. So, focus is everything, right? Going 2 inches wide and 10 feet deep in a certain sector and being a master in that sector is what really creates true success in any business. Fair. So you have three things that you're trying to go accomplish today. Do you have managing directors of each sector? How do you split your time today to assure that all three are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so we have leaders who own each of these disciplines, and then I am responsible for how they all roll up to the sum total performance of the org. We have a GM who runs operations on the service business. We have a head of M&A who has spun up a ton of the deals that we're doing and is building a lot of that machinery out. And then we have, me on the product and engineering side, but also have partnered with amazing kind of engineers and developers and designers to help build product faster. So I largely own kind of growth marketing and engineering, and that rolls up to me. We have a GM who owns and operates the services business, and then we have head of M&A and finance who, in partnership with me, because ultimately, the buck stops here, but helps with a lot of the sourcing and diligencing and that sort of work. I didn't have all those people when we did the first couple deals, but I've since built out that infrastructure and that team, and it's like enormously important. There's no way you can do it without those people.
Jeremy, you're 6 months in, is that correct?
6 months since launch. Yeah, we started exploring this probably November of last year.
What have you learned from being in it for 6 months now, from when you started, about the cabana and the pool cleaning space and so forth, that you can share with the audience?
I don't think it's not much that has been like dramatically surprising. I will say pools in particular are much more complicated than lawns in some ways, right? Everyone, when you talk to any of these home service, operators, everyone thinks that their category is like uniquely hard and special and difficult, and some are harder than others. It's true. Lawns are interesting in that like both pools and lawns have the same characteristic where it's a low barrier to entry. High schoolers or 14-year-olds can do it. But pools and lawns are complex in their own right when you get to like soil chemistry, pH balancing, kind of soil, dealing with grass varieties and kind of weed control, and any of the you get into arbor care, it definitely gets way more sophisticated and way more kind of professionalized. But straight up mowing grass is not a high kind of barrier to entry. That is also true for pools. Like cleaning and treating chemistry in pools is not a high barrier to entry, but all of the machinery and pumps and filters and heaters and electrical around the pool pad is very sophisticated and complex. And you kind of have to hire folks who are combo electrician plumbers and can do a little bit of all of that stuff and have deep domain expertise in and around pools to manage the equipment repair and install and upgrade side. So that is a lot more sophisticated than some of the stuff that we encountered on the lawn side. And that was a fairly quick learning, but a learning nonetheless. And then like pool chemistry is complicated too, right? Like you talk to 10 pool guys and they'll have like probably 7 different remedies for, what do you do if you have high CYA, or your chems are off in one direction or the other. There's a lot of religion in the space. There's a lot of science and like fairly pretty sophisticated chemistry in the space, but still a lot of like cults and opinion, and people who have a preference for doing things because it's what's worked for them in their experience. So navigating that is interesting, and is something that we've had to learn.
And Jeremy, I think the audience is also probably really keen on doing more of these business acquisitions and learning how you're doing this, right? At us at the Pave, we're acquiring some similar companies to yours, sometimes a little bit larger as well. And you're taking on 45 employees, 70 employees, new employees that come into your holdco, right? And there's cultural differences from doing so. It can be quite challenging from that aspect. As you guys have already done 6 acquisitions, those are 6 different pool cleaning owners right now. How have you gone and built trust with these owners? Who's operating these businesses today? Do they stay on? Tell us a little about the structure so people can understand how you actually go do this at mass scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of like just human relationships, right? It's any sale. You're selling the owner on partnering with you. Yes, you're selling them on, can I give you millions of dollars, which is an easier sale than others might be. But it's like they don't want to just sell their company to some random dipshit operator who's going to run it into the ground. Like we're in talks to acquire a company right now who has said no to a bunch of private equity buyers, and they said no because these buyers came along and they were like, hey, I built a garage door company and I have done this successfully in this other category, so I'm going to come do it in pools. And granted, that is also my experience going from lawn to pools, but we have a lot of pool expertise in house as well because we've kept I partnered with the founder, owner, operator of the companies that we've bought, and we have years and years and years and years of domain expertise and a very easily demonstrated ability to run these companies well, right? And that domain expertise matters a lot to sellers who care about their legacy. They care about what they've built. They do not want to hand over the reins, regardless of how much money you've paid them, to someone who's going to treat their employees badly, right? Like that stuff really matters. So, there's an open question to how well that scales. If you need to build that trust and that community and that like friendship, really like literal friendship with 500 sellers, that gets hard. Like I'll report back on that in 10 years, but like at that point, you also like your reputation does a lot of your talking for you, right? Like you have built a business. If you have the privilege of being in that spot where you're navigating 500 transactions a year, you'll have built a business that like speaks for itself, and your track record will speak as much as you ever could. So I think in the near term, before you have that, yeah, be genuine. Don't be skeezy. Like people weirdly, um, yeah, like I guess this is just basic kind of sales, but not connecting with the other person on the other side of the table on a personal level is a huge missed opportunity. It's not a transaction. It is a transaction, but it's not. You can't be transactional about it.
Jeremy, I think this is where you have a huge advantage, and I use the same tactic at the Pave in my company as well. Is that I look at us both as unconventional private equity. When I talk to owners, I'm sure when you talk to owners, completely remove the word private equity from my lingo whatsoever, and we fundamentally try to break things down in a way that they can understand that we're just a human wanting to partner with them in their business, rather than John Daly from XY Capital who has a suit and tie and want to come in and offer sharky terms and using words like pro rata and pari passu and tough terminology to people that don't understand this, right?
Yeah.
And you've used that to your advantage. And I think that's where you have your level of scale to go do this. So when doing so, tell me a little bit about how you're going competing against other PE firms, other buyers, what you've done that you've seen successful that other people can learn from when having these conversations with sellers today. Because A lot of people are putting LOIs out there. They're trying to go buy a business, and sometimes it just doesn't translate. But you've obviously been able to do 6 transactions in 6 months. You're doing something correctly. You have a strong track record to go do so. Break that fundamental relationship building down in a way that people can really understand that is your secret sauce that you can deliver to a mass audience.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky part about this question is that the secret sauce is essentially what I've done over the arc of my entire professional entrepreneurial career and bringing that to bear to build credibility with sellers because I can show them that I've done things in home services that like give me a lot of or very strong evidence that I can run their company well. And that obviously builds trust. And so to your audience, it's like, it's not very helpful to say spend 15 years building and scaling national brands and home services first. Although that is literally why I have an advantage, and that's a kind of durable, difficult one to kind of compete with. But like, I also think that if I were just getting started out and I hadn't had a track record, I would say that friendship and like being earnest and being genuine and caring about these people on a personal level, independent of like whether or not you're going to get a deal done, goes a long way in building camaraderie and building kind of ties that will help them trust you and make them want to partner with you because people want to work with people they like, right? So like, I know it's trite and trivial to say be likable if you want to like win a sale. I don't know many salespeople who take other tactics, but I think like if you don't have a lot of track record, at the very least, be trustworthy, right? Be very trustworthy, give them confidence, show that you are very well prepared. Like write a very robust 30, 60, 90 post-closing integration plan. Share that with the seller. Tell them what you're going to do after you close the deal, right? If you sound smart and like you know what you're doing and you've thought about things that they hadn't even considered and you are solving for making their team happier and treating them well and investing in them and making sure that they are like their futures are brighter than ever post exit, that goes a huge way. That goes like an enormous distance for the seller, right? Sellers look at that and say, I would rather take less money from this guy who's going to treat my team right and is clearly sophisticated and like demonstrates a lot of forethought and mastery about the space than take an enormous not like marginally more money from someone who has evidenced none of these things to me, right? Like that's what I would do. I think that honestly would win you a lot of deals regardless of track record. I don't think it's obvious you don't only win if you've done it before. That is a big advantage, but there are many routes to victory.
I mean, that was so well said, Jeremy. Well done. Jeremy, you've done 2 exits thus far, both successful. You're building Cabana. This is going to be a big company. We've talked about this before offline on what you want to go do with this. Tell the audience where you vision where Cabana is going over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, the goal with Cabana is to build the first national brand in pool care, right? Like you look at every other home service vertical, whether it's True Green, in lawn care, or Orkin in pest control, $25 billion company, Rollins or Terminix, right? Like every other home service vertical of any scale with good revenue profiles generally has one or more national level player that's a household name, that's public scale or huge and private, except for pool cleaning. And there's no law of nature that says that there can't be, right? Like other parts of the pool value chain have been consolidated. Pool Corp has like 60% of the distribution game, $20 billion company. They sell all the pumps, heaters, and equipment, chems and stuff like that. But cleaning, massively fragmented, extremely kind of, it's like mostly what we call single polars or chucks in a truck, right? It's a guy driving around with a pole coming out the back, skimming pools and dosing and testing chems on his own. And, I think there's an opportunity to use software systems, technology, a significant capital advantage, and a deep operating expertise and growth marketing expertise to build a national player in this space. So the plan is let's spend the next 10 or 15 years, however long it takes, building an IPO scale company, a national brand in this category, and building like the Orkin of pools, right? If you think pool cleaning, I want you to think Cabana, and I want anyone in the country anywhere to be able to book a Cabana pool cleaning service. And we're going to do that through a very deliberate roll-up exercise and a lot of technology and a lot of chopping wood and a lot of elbow grease. But I think there's like reasonable line of sight. There's no law of physics that should preclude this outcome from us. It's just, it's there for the doing.
Jeremy, I love your level of mastery, your level of focus in this space. I think it's quite admirable for the audience to understand that if you want to go build something big, you want to go really deep in one sector, like you have in home service, and start doubling down, underscoring in an area, and build great people around you. And I think you've done that quite well. As we start to wrap things up, I like to do a couple things. I want to do a series of rapid fire questions and then kind of get a little bit deeper in a couple areas. Okay.
Okay.
So how we end the podcast is I ask about 5 questions, and I want to hear your first thoughts on each one. Okay. So what social media account is most entertaining for you today?
I would probably say Mark Andreessen on Twitter. Mark Andreessen he's obviously like ridiculously smart, but I think has the unbridled qualities of, they're only afforded to people who are truly post-economic and don't care what you think about what they say, and thus can say whatever they actually think. Like he's ridiculously smart and very unfiltered and comedically genius at times, and it's a lot of fun to follow him. Yeah, it's like, a high IQ shit poster is how I'd probably characterize his Twitter account. It's marvelous. Yeah, follow him.
If you could have any investor today to invest in Cabana, who would it be?
Oh man,
Hopefully this podcast gives you that reach to go do so.
we should talk, Mark, if you're listening to this.
He's in Santa Monica. I've seen his office.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I pitched them with Lawn Love back in the day. They're a good team. I don't know if we're down the fairway for the A16Z thesis, but the fund's certainly large enough for what we want to go do.
Jeremy, money is not an issue. What company are you buying today outside of pool companies?
Oh, that's easy. SpaceX, no question. Like, think about it. SpaceX has a monopoly on orbital launch. Like, SpaceX, a private American company, launches more rockets to space and orbit than China, Russia, and Europe combined. Like, they have taken down the cost of per kilo launch by 99% vis-a-vis Saturn V, from like $5,900 a kilo to what will be with Starship, like $20 a kilo. That is a unassailable advantage that affords you infinite access to the final frontier that is owned by private people. There is no company that even comes close to that. That is unambiguously the most important company for a long time, with maybe one caveat. AI might be similarly important. We'll see where that goes. I don't know if the scaling actually gets there with modern LLMs, or if we need new paradigms. I think there's some indication that they won't scale, but Sam would have you believe otherwise. So if we get to truly like general AI, for whatever that means, that might be more important than space access. But I don't know that it means anything to own a company at that point if like the marginal cost of producing goods and services rounds to zero and we're all post-economic collectively. That's a frontier that I have not yet wrangled with, but it'll be a fun one.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the AI sector. I think there's a lot of ever-changing solutions, which is why you and I kind of share the same resonance on what we're doing and buying these more blue-collar businesses that know that AI, they're more AI resistant, I would say.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I think about this a lot. People always ask me, what's our AI strategy? And I tell them, well, first, you can obviously apply AI across a bunch of the, more near-term features of the business, from support to sales to route optimization or whatever. There's a lot there. And we are using it, and we'll use it. We built a custom computer vision and ML model that looks at your backyard, takes uses satellite imageries of your backyard, detects if you have a pool, measures the circumference of the pool, triangulates the depth, and estimates your gallons, so we can provide you with a quote sight unseen without ever physically setting foot on your property or having to like pull up Google Maps and trace it out like a lot of pool guys do. Doesn't exist in the industry today. We built it in a month. We're going to build a lot more stuff like that. But like when it comes to like truly disrupting the space using AI, by the time you have put a robot in the backyard that is doing the incredibly mechanically complex work of cleaning a pool in order to replace a $20 to $25 an hour human laborer, there are other industries that have fallen long before that, and the world doesn't look anything like what it looks today, right? Like we are all in a radical new landscape of labor and work and meaning. And navigating that is a much more profound issue than like what happens to the pool companies. So I think we'll be one of the last to fall to machinery and like mechanical automation is my guess.
I think you're spot on with that one. I think AI has other problems to solve prior to going to pool cleaning. I would say that.
Yeah, it's easier to automate the lawyers and doctors out of jobs before you automate the $20 an hour pool technicians. That's for sure.
There. What is one tool or resource you cannot live without?
I think I still like to this day would contend that despite all these many years uh, that have kind of transpired since its launch, Google Maps is one of the best products that's ever been created. Like I think the definition of an amazing product is one that you use all the time and forget that you use almost, right? It's like it's unfathomable and unimaginable to go back to a world where you're using a physical paper map. But that's literally what you had to do prior to that, right? I guess like Garmin GPS existed in the interim, but
Not too long ago.
yeah, not that long ago we were reading like atlas guides and whatever. So I think Google Maps is still a incredible product that I forget how amazing it is until I stop and I think about it, and then I remember that it's satellites speeding around ahead at thousands of miles an hour, like tracking my per foot position on planet Earth in order to help me find like the closest Denny's. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it
Uh,
is. 100%.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Jeremy, you've interacted with some very unique people in business, from YC and so forth, all your previous companies. Who's the best person in business you've interacted with and why?
This is a tough one because I know a lot of people that I really respect and hold in high regard. Um, Maybe Paul Graham. Like Paul Graham is and mostly because he's just such a good first principles thinker. Like he does a really good job decomposing um, like difficult, challenging ideas and finding important truths in a noisy landscape and presenting those ideas in like incredible, clearly written essay form. And I just value that like level of thinking. And like he's obviously on the business side. There are other really good thinkers across other domains, but he is a really profoundly good business thinker. And maybe again, kind of harkening back to the Google Maps question, like the evidence of how good of his thinking is the fact that most of his ideas are now pervasive in business, right? A lot of the stuff that he pioneered around kind of startups and fundraising and kind of the dynamic between founders and VCs and how to find good startup ideas have become canon in like startup and technology ecosystems. And they're now like almost like kind of trite. Like you talk about Paul Graham's advice and it's everyone knows it, right? It's commonplace. But that's a testament to how important it was. Like he took something that was in fact not commonplace and was non-obvious, and it was so relevant and important that it is now pervasive and universally understood. And he does this repeatedly across many domains, and I find that extremely impressive, and I remain a big fan.
Jeremy, a question for that, as I think the audience would be very keen on knowing this, is that you've worked with people like Sam Altman, Paul Graham, and so forth. There's people who would think that you have to go create a massive personal brand to go have access to people like this. But you, on the other hand, you keep yourself somewhat silent, I would say. How do you feel you get in front of people like that? Obviously, you're a very knowledgeable individual, but if you don't have a personal brand, you don't have a massive audience, but you're this undercover ninja like yourself and able to go build something big, and people don't know much about you today, how would you go about doing so?
Yeah, I mean, this like definitely kind of tickles at bigger questions around what is the value of personal branding? Should you do it? Should you not? Why are we talking today? Right? Like, there's all of these kind of bigger ideas. A large part of me tends to side with Peter Thiel that crowning yourself king only puts a clock on your head for when society eventually tears you down, and it's better to be like important and powerful and influential, but not necessarily visible, as opposed to being, Mark Zuckerberg dragged before Congress to answer for the crimes of, many others, right? Like, I think there's some truth to that. But then again, there's the Elon, stream of thought, which is brand is currency, and you're doing yourself and your projects and your efforts an enormous disservice to not lean into it, because if you build it, you can spend it, and it's uniquely valuable. And we've seen that across much of society today. I think has like reinforced the idea that even like Trump, right? Like the human brand and the ability to cultivate it can be an enormous lever that you can use toward your benefit. So I'm kind of, yeah, I'm split on the question, but leaning toward more brand matters. As to like how you get access to really good people before you are notable yourself, I would very strongly land on go do interesting things. And I think this is what a lot of people get wrong, is a little counterintuitive. Most people think that like brand building comes from how many posts you're making per day and how many people follow you. And what really matters is, have you done anything that's impressive that people find worthy, right? And there's not really a great substitute. It's like maybe some people pull it off, but I think it's tough to like fake your way to notability. I think most of the people that we follow and find notable, if you strip away the followers, there's something like fundamentally there that they've done that's unique and interesting, right? And so go do unique, interesting things before you like are trying to talk to novel and important people might be the right path. And yeah, you can like also just shoot shots, right? I don't want to discourage people from just shooting the shot. It costs you nothing. I think you might be surprised by who answers your email. But I think in general, like I side very like to your earlier comment that I am fairly understated and stealth moded. This is true, and it's because I care a lot more about the quality of the work that I'm doing than about like building notoriety for its own sake, right? I think I want to be notable for the work itself, not for the velocity of my shit posts on the internet.
Yeah, I could go into that topic for hours, right? Because we do live in a society where impressions are everything these days, and people feel that that is a way to go create leverage of a personal brand to have access to people. But if you unwind that, right, you unwind all the impressions, you unwind what's really behind the coffin. There is my conversation with you, and doing that with four other people who matter actually can get you much further than having tens of thousands of people who don't really know you like your post on a LinkedIn or Twitter social media platform today. And I think I wish people could understand that it's all about building the true relationships and tight knit communities who share the same values, who are on the same mission, and want to go build something big together, whether you have 0 followers or 10 million followers. And people have this anxiety factor today that they're not posting, that they're not go creating a personal brand today, and that causes them feel like they're FOMO, they're missing out on what's possible. So I love that you're like that. You stay in stealth mode. You're the hidden ninja of the pool cleaning business, home service business, and entrepreneurship today. And I appreciate a lot of your time today, Jeremy. You've done excellent on this podcast. And I think what people should get to know you a little bit better, if they do want to get to know Splash today, or if there are any investment opportunities, where can they find out more about you and Cabana? Apologies, not Splash.
Yeah, Splash Cabana. Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Yamaguchi. Shoot me an email, jeremy@cabanapools.com. And happy to chat. Please reach out.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. That's the pod.
Good chatting, man. It was a pleasure.